Quick, can you name at least 10 different official Nintendo cables without the logo on them? I tried. Just like the mouth of a gifted horse, you shouldn't be looking or pointing at that most Nintendo pass controllers are being adapted in some ways for their new ways to play. But as I said, it's a weird thing to point out because Nintendo has always been trying to keep their pass controllers relevant in some sort of ways when possible. We can point out at the GameCube controller ports being present inside of the Wii remotes being compatible and basically necessary for multiplayer with the Wii U. Even re-releasing a GameCube controller for Smash 4 and again with Ultimate.
Adapters sold separately, batteries not included, do not use while operating in motor vehicle or heavy equipment, apply only in affected area, for recreational use only, subject to change without notice, consult your physician, as seen on TV, one size fits all, 3 anchors wearing pants, let hot air, basket frame, spectrum, changeable to a kill.
Plus, all of their main handhelds have been trying since the start to be as retro-compatible as they possibly can. The original Game Boy Advance and SP, not counting the micro, but who cares, being compatible with the original Game Boy and Color games. Heck, even the DS brought the GBA backwards compatibility, even allowing for some games to communicate from slot 1 to slot 2. Even the 3DS being compatible with DS cartridges, but that's just on the hardware handheld side of things. Nowadays, with the Nintendo Switch, it all seems like Nintendo is trying to make something completely different, going to a divergent direction, and it all has been working out. I mean, their top 3 at best selling game consoles of all time lists as of today for something. Top 2 if we're not counting handhelds. But some people, general public, and I don't blame them, they're not as into this as we might be, probably don't remember that Nintendo has always been trying to merge both concepts for the sake of convenience for their users. Hey, notice how I said convenience and not easiness or being practical? Well, in 1994 we got the Super Game Boy, which was a peripheral device that put a Game Boy cartridge slot inside a SNES cartridge to be able to play original Game Boy games in our TVs using SNES controllers. But you see, adapters and contraptions like this always gave you a compromised way to play. Noting here the lack of a link cable port for multiplayer. Solutions, anyone? Well, only on the Japanese market we got the Super Game Boy 2 in 1994, including a link cable port. Now that's not a huge deal, most players probably only cared about being able to play single player stuff. Heck, even I didn't know what the hell was a link cable when I was young. But the main concepts and concerns were present from there on. With the N64, we didn't get an external adapter aside from the transfer pack to play Pokemon Red, Blue or Yellow on Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, but only Pokemon. As it should be. There was no other option, but at least they now added a speed increase inside the emulator with the .duo and .trio modes of the GB Tower. That was a little lackluster for the portable gaming on the TV scene during the N64 era. But hey, I guess that the option was still available if you had a SNES and the Super Game Boy still, so there were ways to do it, just not that practical, as I mentioned before, and it's kind of foreshadow for what's to come. Now with the GameCube, the story changed, just as with horses, but still, don't look at the mouth. So tell me Nintendo, what was your solution to play GBA games on our TVs? Well, buy another Game Boy Advance of course. You silly. Yeah, well, Nintendo released the Game Boy Player in 2003, being essentially a Game Boy Advance to connect at the bottom of your GameCube. It needed a disc that came bundled with it, but had no other way of booting up without it. And nowadays, for those who lost theirs and want to use it again, well, the disc is as expensive as the mouthless horse I've been talking about. But come on, I need a disc even if I essentially have the entire console connected? Yes. Now I get it. I guess it's due to some magic happening inside, telling the GameCube exactly what to do and how to read the signal from the GBA cartridge slot. So it then can display it on the TV and convert the inputs from the GameCube controller to a GBA interface. Speaking of which, unlike the horse's mouth, with some tinkering and appreciation for your bank or organs if you're impatient, you can do a cheap mod on your GameCube and just put an alternative ISO for the Game Boy player to boot up, so you can use the hardware without its official software, just like I did. And before that, Nintendo released a Game Boy to Game Boy Advance link cable. which could be used in tandem with the Game Boy player to use your Game Boy Advance as a controller. It's kinda clunky. The GBA consumes battery for essentially just being an input source. And I mean, you can say that about any current controller, but this is a wired alternative, which makes it a lot more annoying. At least you could turn off the backlight on the SP models, but still. It had its usefulness outside it. You can transfer data and bonuses from your GBA to your GameCube games and vice versa. Hell, even do this for absolutely no reason at all. Plus, the GameCube controller didn't have the best D-pad for the GBA nor original Game Boy library, which you will definitely need. Now, it's not as if the default one was bad, but it was not good enough. Then, something came to my mind. I'll try to walk you through my line of thought. Hey! Remember how we got the NSO NES controllers in late 2018, then the SNES ones in 2019, and finally the N64 and Sega Genesis in 2021? They were so cool, so retro. Just like the NES and SNES Classic Editions, they even came with original controllers, with a Wii remote port though, but it feels like something it's still missing. Huh. I mean, was I just the only one who thought it was weird that the NES nor SNES controllers were adapted in some ways for them to work organically with the Game Boy or GBA apps on NSO? As a default, there is no exclusive theme, animations, nor sound effects, unlike with the other apps once you use their controllers to open them. I mean, they have a ton of extra buttons they don't need. They could have just remapped for them to work as home for you to easily swap software instead of standing up and clicking the home buttons on the Joy-Cons attached to the console. And you could only do that so many times after the third one until it gets annoying. But then I remembered, Nintendo re-released the GameCube controller adapter for the Switch for Smash Ultimate for them to be recognized by the Switch interface. Only as a generic USB controller, not a custom icon unlike with the official NSO ones. Not including the Sega Genesis in this, but that's a whole nother kind of worms. It would have been cool, and for what I know, there was an update for the Switch to recognize the analog triggers input for FLUDD on Mario Sunshine on 3D All-Stars. Now, whether the Switch itself was the one updated and not the adapter, I don't know. But still, they could have at least added a special icon for when plugged in, I guess. But then it dawned on me. What would happen if you plugged a GameCube to Game Boy link cable into the GameCube controller adapter with a GBA on the other side? Well, nothing. You see, the way I understood this was, in order for the GBA to get what's going on, the GameCube and Game Boy player need both to send a signal to the GBA for it to be set to what we will call controller mode. You can see when this is active because the GBA screen will turn completely white, unlike when there is no cartridge inserted nor recognized, which will display a Game Boy Advance logo until turned off. But as I said, we're not here for practical or ease of use, we're only here to get funky. According to a Reddit post linked in the description, if you were to set this up in a particular way, you can end up with this result. You will need your GameCube with a Game Boy player attached, a way to boot it up like the original disc or mod it to get Game Boy interface. Now, insert whatever Game Boy cartridge you want inside the Game Boy player. Plug your GameCube to GBA link cable and plug your GBA on the other end. It doesn't really matter which GameCube controller port you use. Now, turn on your GameCube and let the GBA player disc boot up or launch Game Boy interface. Turn on your GBA, the screen should go completely blank after a sound effect. This confirms we're on controller mode now. Controller mode doesn't deactivate if we unplug the GameCube to GBA link cable, so we take it out from our GameCube and put it on our GameCube controller adapter on our Switch. We wake up our Switch, unlock it, press a button, and voila! The GBA should now be showing like a GameCube controller would. Now, go to the Game Boy or GBA NSO apps and open them up. Now you can use the literal Game Boy controller layout you prefer to play your GBA games with, except for a few caveats. Now, since the GameCube controller doesn't really have a select button, if you press it on your GBA, it won't the way you think. Normally, as it's registering the input as a ZR according to the test inputs mode on the Switch. And that is because of the way the Switch system recognizes controller layouts. Basically, the Switch knows what to expect from the familiar controllers it is programmed to. And since the Switch never expected a select button press to be coming from a GameCube controller, since it didn't make sense for someone to do this to begin with, the functionality of it wasn't added. And I don't think it was ever even planned to. You would still need a second controller or have your dock switch close enough to hit the home button if you want to switch apps. But hey, at least now you could use a GBA as a controller on games where they're not needing as much buttons. And it comes to mind, maybe Nintendo could release an original GBA or SP model form factor controllers for the NSO apps, without a screen, and including inside their chips a pre-installed controller mode ROM to make them usable without much trouble. Heck, we can go even further on theorizing. Did you see the latest Gachapon Nintendo fidget toys? They're amazing as a collectible, a toy, and for this example, as a direct reference. That way, the Game Boy and GBA apps would have their theme and sound effects changing mechanics once you use said controllers on their respective apps, the same way the others do, going for consistency in the product, which Nintendo really likes to do.